We're here at the New York premiere of Back to Black, the new Amy Winehouse biopic starring Marissa Abela and Jack O'Connell and plenty more, who are about to walk the black carpet behind us before the screening of the movie. Can't wait to talk to them. I would love to hear a little bit about the vocal training that you went through for this role. What was that like?
There's a difference with the studio recording of Rehab to the moment that Amy sang Rehab at the Grammys when she wasn't allowed into America. And she just come out of rehab herself and she just won 5 Grammys. That feels different. There's a fierceness to that performance that you can't really find in the studio recording. So I needed to be able to emulate that. So it was, it was internal sort of work as an actor, but also, I trained for 2 hours a day every day for 4 months as a singer, learning, I guess how to sing like Amy.
She came to us and said that she wasn't a singer, and actually she didn't play guitar, but she worked with our guitar tutor Ben Parker to learn the pieces. She worked really hard and closely with Anne-Marie Speed, who was a vocal coach, and over many months just really sort of found her voice and embodied the spirit of Amy.
How did you personally navigate some of the challenges of telling and the ethics of telling what is ultimately a really tragic story for yourself?
I think that, it's an important question as to whether it is an ultimately incredibly tragic story. I think the truth is that the legacy that Amy leaves behind, I think, is her music. And I think that it was important to us as creatives to honor her in the sense of she's a young woman, before the age of 25, she wrote 2 albums. One was Frank, a huge success in the UK and amongst many music fans, and the other one, Back to Black, is an album that changed the world. And I think that the story for a long time has become a voyeuristic one about the tragedy of her downfall, and I think that we felt it was really important to give her some power back, in the intensity of her truthfulness as an artist. Of course, in her personal story, there's a lot of tragedy. So that's up to me to find out the root of that. They're a symptom of something deeper, and it was up to me to discover what the deeper thing was, and try and bring the desire forward. So if it's that Amy wants to be loved and doesn't want to be alone, and doesn't want to feel pain, then it's that I'm playing rather than someone that needs to numb themselves with whatever it is,
You've said that you don't see this movie entirely as a biopic. It's a love story. But biopic or not, it's being received as that way by a lot of people. How important is it to you to get some of those historically, realistically accurate depictions in this type of film?
I mean, the thing was that I had so much resource material, there was so much footage that we could, mirror and emulate. And then there's also, behind closed doors, recreating the conversations between her and Blake, for example, where we had to just go off of what she wrote in her songs as emotionally what she was feeling in those moments, and then to try and reflect that as close as possible to that.
I want to be a mom.
And how do you personally navigate the ethics of telling what can be a really tragic story?
I had to be very, very sensitive, and I had to walk a very fine line. And it was something that I took on as a responsibility, and would stand in the moment each day and just think, what would she feel about how I'm reflecting this moment?
Why, in your opinion, is it important to tell Amy and her family's story in this way at this point in time?
Because I think it's right to take back the narrative, to celebrate Amy, to celebrate her brilliance, and to challenge the narrative that she was a victim in some way. She wasn't a victim, she was an incredibly strong woman. But when women die of drug abuse, they're always infantilized. People always say, well, it's because the men did this or did that. And they take away the autonomy of Amy. Amy had lots of autonomy, lots of self-volition. And we should celebrate her, because that's what made her a brilliant artist.
I think it was a story that needed a bit of distance from her death and her life. But I think that all the elements came together for this film. Sam being a friend of hers and the producers, it was just kind of turned into a bit of a powerful mix, because it's not an easy film to bring out. Everyone has their own opinions about Amy, and it had to be a film with a lot of power behind it, and I think that is this film.
I would call Amy a co-writer of this. I really think I've used a lot of her words, obviously all her lyrics, but some classic interview lines and how she felt made the research process a lot easier than it would have been.